The map of the African continent is being redrawn, not with the ink of foreign diplomats, but with the dust of the Red Earth. For decades, the Sahel was treated as a chessboard for external powers, a landscape where sovereign borders were merely suggestions, and where peace was a commodity bought with heavy conditions. This is the stark truth of a silent war. The vulnerable populations paid the price in broken promises and stolen futures, watching their ancestral lands turn into playgrounds for proxy conflicts. But the wind has shifted. A sudden awakening is sweeping across the desert sands, changing the balance of power forever. When the old rules crumble, a profound question echoes across the savannah. Can a people truly reclaim their destiny when the entire world order has decreed their submission? If this resonates with your sense of justice, do not leave. Like this video, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the Sahel Doctrine, not for us, but to keep the flame of dignity burning brightly as we uncover the truths hidden from the global headlines. Let us look directly at the front line, where the illusions of the old world are shattering under the weight of precise realities. In the Plea region, deep within the heart of Mali, a dramatic escalation has re-established the rule of law. For months, international observers claimed the sovereign state was on the brink of collapse, yet the actions on the ground tell a fundamentally different story. It began with a highly sophisticated reconnaissance mission. Moving silently through the northern skies, the tactical air vectors of the Malian armed forces scanned the vast, unforgiving terrain of the Mopti region. There, concealed within the brush, lay a hidden training base belonging to the insurgent coalition known as JNYM. It was an elaborate headquarters, a sanctuary built on the assumption that the state could not see them, that the skies still belonged to the ghosts of foreign intervention. They were wrong. With absolute precision, targeted strikes dropped from the heavens, completely devastating the encampment. Every insurgent present at that location was neutralized, their operational capacity dismantled in a single thunderous moment. This was not a random skirmish. This was a calculated manifestation of national sovereignty. In the nearby Neono sector, the strategy deepened as ground components moved in perfect harmony with aerial surveillance. The combined deployment of area vectors and infantry units represents a completely new modus operandi for the region, an unstoppable force designed to reclaim every inch of sacred soil. As the infantry swept through the remnants of the smoking camp in Neono, they expected to find standard weapons and tactical gear. Instead, what they uncovered among the wreckage was far more sinister, a discovery that completely exposes the dark reality of the forces trying to tear this nation apart. The items recovered from the dirt reveal a truth so shocking it changes everything we thought we knew about this conflict. What lay buried in the red earth of the Neono sector was not the gear of a proud liberation movement, but the tragic evidence of a hollow proxy force. When the Malian infantry, operating in close coordination with the African Corps, processed the secured camp, they dismantled more than just physical infrastructure. They uncovered a mountain of abandoned machinery, smashed communication radios, blackened frames of military motorcycles, discarded rifles, and shattered armored personnel carriers. These were the high-tech capabilities provided by extensive outside networks, the tools used to fuel a brutal campaign of destabilization. Yet the most damning evidence was found inside the medical tents. Scattered across the dirt were thousands of used needles, empty syringes, and discarded ampules of specialized medications, pharmaceuticals belonging to the A-line and cephalosporin classes. Alongside these medical supplies lay an unprecedented cache of heavy narcotics. This is the raw reality of the conflict. These insurgent fighters were systematically drugged before being deployed on any mission, transformed into chemically altered instruments of war, prepared artificially to withstand the devastating impact of modern defensive operations. These men were sedated so heavily that even when struck by flying shrapnel, they could cover hundreds of meters across the sand before finally collapsing from internal hemorrhage. They were fighting without souls, driven by chemical illusions rather than sacred duty, sent as expendable infantry into a war that was never truly theirs. This moral vacuum became undeniably clear during the dark events that shook the historic city of Kidal. On the morning of the 25th of April, the peace of the dawn was shattered by an overwhelming, unprecedented assault. A massive, heavily armed international coalition of over 2,000 combatants converged upon the city from all directions. They were equipped with advanced technological assets, sophisticated reconnaissance drones, lethal kamikaze drones, and heavily booby-trapped vehicles designed to inflict maximum terror. They targeted strategic administrative buildings, aiming to cripple the local leadership and force a total collapse of authority. But their violence quickly turned against the very people they claimed to protect. The occupying forces systematically ransacked local shops, stripped vulnerable families of their belongings, and plundered private domestic kitchens. What they could not carry away, they burned to ashes, leaving a trail of destruction across the ancient streets. Yet, it was in this very moment of darkness that the true spirit of Africa shone with magnificent brilliance. The resilient population of Kidal looked at the invaders and made a historic, monumental choice. They refused to identify with terror. They refused to bow their heads to a lawless force. In an extraordinary act of collective resistance and supreme dignity, the entire population completely deserted the city within a single 24-hour period. Fathers, mothers, and elders packed what little they could carry and walked out into the open desert, leaving behind the homes they loved to ensure their honor remained unbroken. They did not flee out of cowardice. They marched out of profound pride. This was an unyielding assertion of sovereignty. They chose the hardships of the dust road over the humiliation of submission, leaving the invaders with nothing but an empty shell, a hollow prize of stone and sand. The terrorists celebrated their arrival in a ghost town, entirely oblivious to the reality that their apparent victory was an absolute illusion. They believed they had conquered a stronghold, but they had actually walked directly into a massive strategic trap. The illusion of insurgent success faded instantly against the backdrop of a grand strategic realignment. When the multinational coalition launched its desperate blitzkrieg across strategic sectors like Gao, Sinu, and Savare, they operated on an outdated playbook. They assumed each nation stood isolated, weak, and dependent on foreign benevolence. They failed to realize that the old borders, drawn by colonial architects to keep a continent divided, had lost their power over the minds of a new generation. At the absolute center of this transformation stands a vital source of continental inspiration, the young captain whose unyielding stance has redefined modern resistance. Captain Ibrahim Traore looked across the artificial borders from Burkina Faso and recognized that a blow against Bamako was a direct assault on the collective soul of the Sahel. He did not offer empty diplomatic platitudes. He offered a revolutionary brotherhood of defense. He carried a torch of absolute self-reliance, reminding his people that true security cannot be outsourced to those who profit from their instability. Through his defiant leadership, the alliance ceased to be a mere treaty on parchment and became a living, breathing shield of steel and fire. He spoke a truth that echoed from the smallest villages to the highest offices. This is not charity. This is not aid. This is sovereignty. They built chains. We break them. Under his vision, a profound awakening galvanized a unified response, demonstrating that when one brother bleeds, the entire alliance rises to answer the call. Before we reveal the next chapter, which is perhaps the most powerful assertion of sovereignty you will ever hear, I want to pause and speak directly to you. If this channel has moved you, if these stories are touching something deep in your spirit, then consider becoming a member. Not for exclusive content or perks, but because supporting this channel is directly supporting narratives that mainstream media refuses to tell. Every membership is a vote for the Sahel Doctrine's mission. Every member becomes a co-creator of the revolution we are documenting. Join us. Stand with the principle that African wealth belongs to Africa. With the alliance solidified, the traditional masters of geopolitical manipulation found themselves cast into the shadows. For decades, foreign entities maintained a heavy, suffocating presence under the guise of peacekeeping, yet terrorism only multiplied under their watch, spreading from the remote north into the fragile center. Now, their mask has slipped completely. Behind closed doors, intercepted communications and candid admissions from displaced Western diplomats have exposed an insidious shift in strategy. They openly admit that because their forces and ambassadors are no longer held as geopolitical leverage in nations like Niger, they have lost their official foothold. In their own words, they no longer face an Alamo-like position, giving them greater latitude to pivot toward clandestine actions. They have officially turned their sights toward covert destabilization operations, intending to use asymmetric sabotage, intelligence laundering, and proxy networks to fracture the historic unity of the Sahel from within. This is the final, desperate gamble of an empire in decay, an attempt to achieve through whispers and shadows what they could no longer enforce with overt military mandates. They funded the propaganda, orchestrated the media smear campaigns, and supplied sophisticated weaponry to drug-fueled proxies to simulate chaos. But the architects of this covert subversion made a fatal miscalculation. They underestimated the sheer depth of the indigenous intelligence network now guarding the region. The unified states did not merely watch the shadows, they mapped them with flawless precision, preparing an ironclad counter-strategy that would transform the entire frontier into an inescapable web. The response of the unified Sahel states to these covert shadows was not born out of a desire for vengeance, but from a sacred duty to protect the Red Earth. On the vast battlefield stretching across the desert flanks, the grand architecture of the Mali counteroffensive began to manifest with absolute, crushing momentum. This was no longer a series of isolated defensive reactions. It was a synchronized masterstroke of regional defense. To the eastern, western, and southern flanks of the critical Labzina region, a wall of steel had been quietly erected. The unified forces of the Alliance of Sahel States deployed their patrol vehicles, heavy armored personnel carriers, and aerial assets to completely seal the perimeter. Every official highway, every ancient trade route, and every unmarked desert pathway used by smugglers and insurgent networks for generations was methodically brought under absolute state control. The skies above offered no sanctuary for the forces of destabilization. Advanced reconnaissance assets, including the heavily armed Nigerian Aksong platforms, maintained an unblinking 24-hour vigil over the entire landscape. These precise Sahel drone strikes transformed the open desert into an impenetrable shield, stripping the insurgent networks of their mobility, their supply lines, and their capacity to terrorize the innocent. Take a second right here to tell us where you are watching from. Type the name of your city, your land, or the community where you stand. As you do, know this. The Sahel Doctrine sends you not just our deepest gratitude for walking this path with us, but a heartfelt blessing for strength in your endeavors, pride in your heritage, and light on the road ahead. The comments below are more than words. They are a living map of global solidarity, proving that the desire for truth and sovereignty reaches far beyond artificial borders. With the borders locked and the skies secured, the reality of the battlefield has shifted dramatically for the cornered insurgent factions. Gone are the days when these armed groups could commit atrocities in central Mali and simply flee across the international frontier into Algeria to rest, rearm, and plan their next incursions. The sanctuary has evaporated. The unified alliance has turned the entire northern pocket into a sealed crucible, an inescapable environment where the tattered remnants of the JNIM and the separatist FLA find themselves utterly isolated. In the historic stronghold of Kidal, the ground is literally vibrating under the weight of an unprecedented systematic military encirclement. The air is thick with the thunder of defensive bombardments as state forces systematically dismantle the remaining defensive positions, fuel depots, and illegal weapons caches established by the mercenary coalitions. The very sand that once hid their lawless operations has become a tactical prison. These heavily drugged, highly equipped proxy units, who once proudly broadcasted their sophisticated kamikaze operations and celebrated their temporary capture of empty streets, now face the cold, unyielding reality of a professional state apparatus that refuses to negotiate with terror. They are trapped in a narrow, rapidly shrinking kill zone between Tessalit and Kidal, watching their sophisticated capabilities turn to ash beneath the relentless pressure of a people determined to be free. The price of their betrayal is being collected in real time, and as the walls close in, the arrogant confidence of the insurgent commanders has collapsed into absolute panic. Faced with total annihilation on the battlefield, the leadership of this lawless coalition has done something that no one anticipated, a move that reveals their utter desperation and exposes the supreme hypocrisy of their entire campaign. The proxy commanders are entirely broken. The leadership of the separatist FLA and their insurgent allies have completely abandoned their hollow declarations of absolute power. Stripped of their supply lines and watching their mercenary forces melt away under the desert sun, they have turned to the ultimate refuge of the defeated, international diplomacy. In an act of supreme hypocrisy, they have sent an urgent, desperate appeal to the United Nations Security Council and Human Rights Watch. The very entities they ignored during their campaigns of plunder are now being begged to intervene. They are pleading for a negotiated settlement, frantically demanding the resurrection of the defunct Algiers Accord. They are begging for a dialogue, an exit strategy, a political lifeline to save them from total military erasure. How the tables have turned. There was a time when these armed factions could strike with impunity, confident that foreign protectors would shield them from consequence. Today, they look at the iron wall surrounding them and realize that no external charter can save them from the judgment of a sovereign state. As their tactical infrastructure crumbles in the northern pockets, their external sponsors have deployed their final desperate weapon, psychological warfare. A massive, highly coordinated media smear campaign has flooded digital networks, designed to manufacture treachery and instill panic among the population. Malicious actors even unearthed archival video footage from July 2024, showing burning transport minibuses in distant Senegal, and fraudulently recirculated it as current events in May 2026 to simulate a collapse of security in Mali. The mainstream press eagerly amplified these fabrications, whispering of internal betrayals, sudden abductions, and the alleged disappearance of the governor of Kidal. But shadows cannot survive the blinding light of direct evidence. The governor appeared live on the ground, completely healthy, deeply confident, and flanked by his elite security detail. He directly exposed the media manipulation, confirming that the state remains in absolute control and that the historic exodus of the population was the ultimate rejection of terror. Before we close, let us pause and reflect on this historic transformation. What you have just heard is not simply a fleeting news report. It is a monument to the unyielding endurance of a people who refuse to let their history be written by outsiders. If this journey toward truth has moved your spirit and answered your sense of justice, then subscribe to this channel, the Sahel Doctrine. We do not look for mere numbers. We ask for your commitment to walk with us as we build a sacred space where the voices of true independence are honored and where the stories of continental pride continue to be told without fear. By subscribing, you are choosing to stand with the truth, ensuring that the flame of dignity carried by a new generation of leaders is never allowed to fade into silence. Join us and stand ready for the next chapter of Africa's unfolding glory. The red sands of the Sahel are no longer a theater of foreign exploitation. The desperate cries of a cornered proxy force seeking shelter under international bodies prove that the old era of manipulation has met its match. What the world is witnessing today is a historic triumph, a definitive Kidal tactical victory that permanently shatters the cycle of engineered instability. The flawless execution of the comprehensive Mali counteroffensive has proven to the entire globe that African nations possess the tactical brilliance, the technological autonomy, and the unshakable unity required to defend their soil without external interference. The days of subversion are over. This historic Kidal tactical victory stands as an eternal testament to what can be achieved when brother nations stand shoulder to shoulder, driven by a shared awakening and an absolute refusal to submit. The deep scars of the past are transforming into symbols of majestic resilience. The heavy drum of freedom beats across the savannah, carrying the voices of millions who have broken their chains forever. The sun is rising over an unchained Sahel, and its brilliant light will never be extinguished.